But right now I want to turn our attention to Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, I'm going to read verses 13 through 16. They say this: "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let's just walk through these phrase by phrase. Here's what I think we're going to see in this overall, is that followers of Jesus are called to bring life where there is death and light where there is darkness. Life where there is death and light where there is darkness. So let's start with this first phrase, you are. This is an interesting phrase. And, this is a phrase that I've thought a lot over, even from a young age. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Jesus is speaking this to a mixed crowd. His disciples are there, but there's also a lot of other people there. And then he says to them, you are the salt of the earth. Okay, well, he doesn't say that you should be the salt of the earth. Y'all aren't living the right way. You should be the salt of the earth. He doesn't even give it as a command, like you be the salt of the earth. He makes a statement, a declarative statement. You are the salt of the earth. And I think that reminds us that believers are in a position of influence, whether we realize it or not. And I think sometimes it's positive influence. We're leading people the right way. Sometimes it's negative influence. Sometimes people, if you work in a secular workplace where a lot of people might not be followers of Jesus, even if they say they're Christians or they have some church background, but you work in the secular world, then you know that all eyes are on you, right? And that if you, that everybody can cuss up a storm and tell all kind of inappropriate jokes or whatever, but the moment you do it, everybody stops and pays attention. Now, I know nobody in this room has ever done any of that, but hypothetically, if you had, in that situation, everybody goes, well, wait a second. You're not supposed to do that. Why? Because one way or the other, we're an influence. Some of you have had the experience, I've heard this from many people, especially who work in a secular workplace, that, I went for years and I thought I wasn't really making an impact. I would pray, Lord, help me share the gospel. Help me share the gospel. And I would try, and it just seemed I was never getting anywhere. And then somebody came to me and either said, hey, I know you can get to God. Will you pray for my friend? Or I know you'll tell me the truth. I need to know what the Bible says about this or that. Or I need to find God and I don't know what to do. And you're the person that I need to come to. So all the while, what does that tell you? That tells you they were watching and that you were having influence on them. So I believe that Christians are the kind of people that we can't choose not to have influence. We will have influence. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. In fact, we're either functioning as the salt of the earth and light of the world, or we're going against the very nature of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. You cannot be a follower of Jesus and have zero impact. You will have an impact. It's like throwing a rock in the water. There will be impact. There's no way that a follower of Christ who's full of the Holy Spirit, who's living out the Word, can enter into a space where people are not doing those things and not have some kind of influence. Now, again, you may not see it or you might not see the full impact of it, but if you're not having any influence at all, then you're really going against the nature of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So if that's happening, here's two possibilities. Either we won't be able to sustain that very long. There are times where you just go, okay, I'm done being the good guy. I'm done being the one who's always encouraging everybody. I'm done being the one who's always trying to say, hey, we shouldn't do that. That's not right or whatever. And you just go, I'm done with it. But then your heart, the Holy Spirit, your conscience won't let you. Okay, no, you know what? I've got to be who I am. Or maybe, perhaps, we aren't truly followers of Jesus. I think those are two legitimate questions to ask. Am I going through a season where I've just lost my fire? Or do I really need to reevaluate whether I'm a follower of Christ or not? If I look around and I just don't seem to be, I seem to be so persuaded by the crowds and there's nothing in me that leads against the grain, even if it's in small ways, then I think those are questions that we need to ask. Who is Jesus referring to? That's another question I've had throughout the years. You're the light of the world. Okay, was he talking about Israel? Was he talking about Israel, or was he talking about the church? I think the answer to that question is yes. I think he was speaking to his disciples, but the Jewish people are listening, and it becomes apparent in just a moment that the people are listening in, and his message in the Sermon on the Mount is for his disciples, which would represent the church, the new community that Jesus is establishing, but it would also apply to Israel. So I think we could say it this way, that Israel was designed to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. And they never quite lived up to it. And so now this new community that Jesus is establishing, this new community around him as the Messiah, was going to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth, mainly because he was going to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. Because this is something where we do it together. It's the collective you, it's y'all. Y'all are the salt of the earth. Y'all are the light of the world. It's this us doing it together. Jesus builds this community. So it's not you go out and be the salt of the earth, you go out and be the salt of the earth. No, it's us together. That means that sometimes I'm going to be more salt than you, and sometimes you're going to be more salt than me. Sometimes you're going to be more light, I'm going to be more light. And we need each other. We do this in community. I do want to warn us that this is not automatic. Don't hear me saying that we can just say, hey, well, I'm going to be the salt of the earth, so let me just go out and do it. Or I'm going to be the light of the world. I think this is like so much in our salvation where it is God's work. God is going to do this. We cannot be influencers in this world unless the Lord just does it through us. But it's like so much of our salvation. Who's responsible for our spiritual growth? Who's responsible for making sure that we grow in Christ's likeness? Well, it's a promise from God. God says he's going to do it. God says he sent us everything we need to make it happen, but he also holds us accountable to grow spiritually. In other words, when we start trying to divide out which part is God's part of us being salt and light and which part is our part, we're never going to win that. All we can do is not God's part, that's his part. All we can do is pursue being salt and light, and then know that ultimately if God doesn't do it, then we won't have any hope of actually doing it. So you are what? The salt of the earth. The salt's value. Why the salt of the earth? Well, there's a couple of obvious reasons, but one thing that we don't think of is the value of salt. I've got like 4 different boxes of salt. There's all kind of fancy salt now. You can get iodized salt, non-iodized salt. You can get the whatever that pink salt stuff is. Just salt. Salt is everywhere. If I were to try to get you to give me $20 for a salt shaker, you'd think I was crazy just because of the salt that's inside of it. But salt used to be very valuable. It was hard to get, and it was used for preserving things. And so in a time where there's no refrigeration, it was very valuable. You've heard the phrase, he's worth his salt. That comes from soldiers, Roman soldiers who were paid with salt. So they would be paid with salt, and they would they were very thankful to be paid in salt. I'd be pretty upset if I was out fighting barbarians, and at the end of the day I came back, and my commander said, here's your salt for the day. Salt's value. What about salt's preservative function? Salt kills bacteria, so it preserves meat, and this was the only way to really preserve meat. So think about this phrase, you are the salt of the earth. You're the preservative of the earth. You're the one who, that's where we get this idea that we bring life. We bring life by pushing back death. I hope you see the power of that illustration. We bring life by pushing back death, because as we enter, the very nature of who we are pushes back death. So we are the salt of the earth. We help preserve societies that aren't even necessarily Christian societies. So this is not saying that our role in a society is to make sure that every single person comes to know Christ, and then we'll have a society that's worth living in. If we wait for that day, there would never be any society on earth that's worth living in. But no, we serve this preservative function in the world, and we help preserve. What about saltiness? So Jesus says here that if salt loses its taste, it can't be made salty again. Some critics of the Bible have pointed out that, salt can't lose its taste. And that's true. The formula for sodium is always salty. It always tastes salty. But most first century salt was contaminated with something else, either unintentionally, where just as you're gathering salt, there are other things in it that look like salt. You use the salt dissolves, as we know. The salt dissolves out, it's carried away with the food, and you're left with this imitation salt that has no salt in it. And then people would throw it out and just because it was no good. But then there were other people who took advantage of salt looking like other things, and they would sell cheaper salt, and they would mix in intentionally a lot of imitation items that look like salt.
Byproducts.
Yes, things that could trick you to think they're salt. So then, if the salt loses its saltiness, or if the salt is no good, then it's not good for anything. If you've got bad salt, you really can't do anything with it. You might as well just throw it out the door. So that's that idea of it losing its saltiness. I think that there's an illustration there of, you think about the church. So the church being both visible and invisible, meaning visible church, you see all the people in the church. The invisible church is the church that only God can see. In other words, if you have 1,000 people in a room, they all are part of a church, not all of them actually follow Christ. And so you have that moment where you maybe have a filtering out. And you have, I think, some churches, maybe even some entire denominations, where most true Christ followers have stepped away because of decisions they've made. In other words, they've lost their saltiness. I pray that would never happen to our church, but it could happen to our church. If we drift away from the true gospel, then if that were to happen in any church, I would say don't stay as a member of a church that drifts away from the true gospel. So I think the salt can lose its saltiness in that way. But what does it mean for us then to be the salt of the earth? I think it means that we play a preservative role. But think about this when it comes to salt. When it comes to salt, a little bit goes a long way. My kids think it's cool to put salt on food. So they think it's cool because it's something adults do. So they don't even taste the food. They just grab their plate, and if you let them, they'll grab a salt shaker, they'll just put it on anything. So they can't do that. We let them use their own pepper, but if they want to add salt to food, an adult has to do it. And really, especially for Elizabeth, who's 3, and Daddy, I want salt. What do you want it on? Just everything. So I take the salt shaker, and I just boop, like that, and I go, there you go, baby. There's salt on it. How does it taste? Oh, it tastes so good, Daddy. She has no idea. Because you can kill food with salt. Too much salt is not good. So I want you to think about that in 2 ways. We a little bit goes a long way. We can think about that in our preservative role. We have to be careful how and when we speak into preservative moments. In other words, not every battle is a hill worth dying on. We don't say at every battle, well, this is where we take our stands as Christians. We have to be really careful because a little salt, that preservative function, a little salt goes a long way. And then also think about it from the standpoint of impact. So a little salt goes a long way. What if our nation just completely abandons the gospel and any moral foundation and kind of continues down the moral path that's going on? Will we have any influence? Well, I want to point to the example of Daniel. A little salt goes a long way. Daniel, one person, of course he had his friends there, and there were other Christians living there in Babylon, but they certainly were outnumbered and overpowered, but a little salt goes a long way. They had a tremendous influence, more than likely led to the salvation of Nebuchadnezzar. And if you study Nebuchadnezzar, you come to realize he may be the most powerful person that ever walked the face of the earth. It's hard to find somebody who had more power and influence than Nebuchadnezzar, and through Daniel's influence, not only did Nebuchadnezzar really seem to have a real faith moment, it's very possible that even Darius, another one of the emperors, came to a moment where he really made a confession and a profession of faith in the one true God. So a little salt goes a long way. We don't have to lament our diminishing role in society. And really, if you look across history, Christians have been the most influential when they've been the least powerful. It's been at times when we're in power where we could really mess things up. But when we have those roles where we're just subject and some government's trying to press us down, it's at that moment that we seem to really make those grassroots changes. People come to the gospel, come to know Christ in droves, and they start living out the gospel, and it makes this kind of grassroots impact. In other words, as Christians, historically, we've been much more effective from the bottom up than we've ever been from the top down. Now, that doesn't mean we should shy away from the opportunity to speak at the highest levels. It just means that we shouldn't walk away in a moment like this and throw our hands up and go, well, there's nothing we can do now. We can't in any way impact American society because we're being pushed out of places of influence. No, we should say God is God. And God will accomplish what He accomplishes when He wants to accomplish it, the way He wants to accomplish it. He can use us when we are marginalized, and He can use us when we have more influence. He is God. That's what He does. And so we shouldn't lament this loss of influence in that way. We should lament and weep for our nation as we see our nation going down a path that we know is going to bring it a lot of pain, but we shouldn't lament because we've lost some kind of influence. God is much bigger than that. Also, God's people play a seasoning role in attracting others to the gospel with our way of life. So it's not just preserving. I do think it's seasoning. Paul backs me up here in Colossians 4:5-6, where he says that we should walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of our time. Let your speech be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. Again, a little goes a long way. We can even apply this to evangelism. If you're the guy who comes in to work every day and it is all Jesus all the time to people who don't want to hear it, you know what happens. Eventually they tune you out. If you're the guy who comes into work and you never speak about Jesus, how are they going to know? How are they going to know about Jesus? So you look for these opportunities and sometimes even create opportunities to speak about Jesus and about the gospel, and you let your conversation be seasoned with salt. Learn how to be winsome and learn how to attract people to a conversation so that you can use that for the gospel. Finally, I want us to see this, and I think this is super important as we think about this idea of being salt. If we compromise those qualities which give us preservative qualities in order to be accepted. So what if we go that route? What if we say, well, you know what? We need to have more influence. And one way to have more influence is to give a little bit on some areas. You know, if we give a little bit over here, we give a little bit over there. I would say that's probably the best way that we could lose our saltiness. If salt loses its saltiness, okay, so here's what we think, what some Christians think. Yeah, you know, this issue or that issue is kind of difficult to talk about, so let's put it to the side, not talk about it, and then more people will listen to us. But what does Jesus say? If you lose your saltiness, it's not that they hate you necessarily, it's that they don't have any use for you. You know, I heard a pastor say a few years ago that much of what we call preaching now is very similar to what you would hear from Oprah, what you would hear from a life coach. You know, it has no real biblical content to it. And what they think in their mind is, well, people like Oprah, so if I'm more like Oprah in what I say, then people will like me and more people will come and more people will somehow come to know Jesus. But here's the problem with that way of thinking. Oprah is better at being Oprah than the church is at being Oprah. And so when we become Oprah, the world says, well, you're not dangerous to us anymore. We don't dislike you anymore. We just don't need you anymore. But when the church sets its feet on the truth of the gospel and says, this is our message, this is who we are not trying to offend you, and we're not going to go out of our way to offend you, but we cannot move on these issues. Then as the world collapses all around them and they realize that Oprah, and I don't mean any offense to Oprah in what I'm saying here, that Oprah is more sugar than salt. In other words, Oprah is great, sounds sweet, and man, I tell you what, cotton candy. It's really good, and a lot of people will line up to hear what she has to say. But there's really nothing of value there that's going to get you through the day. And when all of that falls apart, they're going to look for a voice that is distinct. And if we lose our saltiness, if we give up because the world seems to not like what we have to say, there won't be any voice there for them to turn to. So we stand solid on biblical principles. We don't apologize for the truth we believe in. But I will say, as we kind of shift gears, that even though we want to keep our saltiness, we want to recognize that salt a little bit goes a long way. But when it comes to light, people who are in darkness will take just about as much light as you can give them. They need light. So as we think about light and that preservative quality and that role we play where we say this is right, this is wrong, we want to preserve society, we think a little salt goes a long way. When we think about light, we think, where is the darkness, and let's get the light there. Who's hurting, and how can we bring light to them? Who is it that is oppressed by sin? Who is it that is oppressed by other people? And how can we get the truth of the gospel to them? And so you know this, you've seen this. Who's more likely to come to Christ? Somebody who everything's going all right in their life and everything's good and they're not really in a season of darkness, or somebody who is at the bottom of the rope. It is in the darkest times that the light makes the most impact. I've heard of so many testimonies, and a lot of them come from Gideons who share testimonies of people. In fact, we have one in our own church, by the way, who has this same testimony, who will go to a hotel or a motel to take their own life, find a Bible, and be at the point where they're about to take their own life, the lowest point they've ever been, and they give their life to Jesus. Why is that? Because light. They are in the darkness and they see the light. So not only are we to be the salt of the earth, we're to be the light of the world. The question comes to mind when you read this: Are we the light of the world, or is Jesus the light of the world? How does this work? Yes, Jesus is the light of the world, and we're the light of the world. How does that work? It's pretty simple. Jesus produces light; we reflect the light. We don't produce any light in and of ourselves. We have no power to do that. We're like the moon to the sun. We get all of our light from Jesus, and the amount of light that we are projecting at any given time is dependent upon how much we're facing Jesus, because the only light we can give off is that comes from Him. He is the ultimate light of the world. And then I think it's interesting that He clarifies what He means by this. You're the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do men put a lamp under a bushel, but they put it on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your good deeds be seen by men, that they may glorify your Father who's in heaven. So you go, what do you mean, Jesus, by being light? Well, He clarifies that for us by saying it's about doing good deeds. It's about living out your faith in a way that people see that and give glory to your Father in heaven. He said doing that's like a city on a hill. It's like imagine you, now we live in a time of headlights and street lamps and those kind of things. There's very little real darkness that we ever encounter as people. But if you get, especially if you get out west, or if you just go back a few years to where there were no headlights, there were not even any flashlights. And picture yourself making your way along a dark path, and you don't know really where you're going, but off in the distance there's a city on a hill. And you see that city, and you can see it's lit up, and you know that's where I'm headed. That's the place I'm going. That's what Jesus says the church is to be like. We're to be like that. A city on a hill in darkness. It can't be hidden. There's no way you can hide it from sight, and people are drawn to it. And then He says we're like a light on a stand. You put a light on a stand in a house. Next time your power goes out, you should think about this passage. Power goes out, and what do? You turn your cell phone on to find the candles. You light the candles, and then the candles kind of become the magnet. You don't have to go gather all the kids from all over the house. They come to the candle. Or if your heat goes out over the last few weeks and you light a fire in the fireplace, you don't have to call the kids in. You just light the fire, and the whole family gathers around the fire. And so that idea of a city on a hill or a light on a stand, it gives light to all who are in the house, and it draws them to the light. We take the light to the darkness, but also in some ways, when we hold the light of the gospel up, people who are in the darkness are drawn to the light. One last note on this. It's interesting. Jesus says to let your good deeds be seen by men. So He says that we should let our good deeds be seen by men, so that they may glorify our Father who is in heaven. But then in chapter 6, verse 1, some of you might have already thought about this. Hey, doesn't Jesus, just a few statements later, say that we should not practice our righteousness before men to be seen by them? So is Jesus contradicting Himself? What's going on here? Well, in this passage, Jesus is talking about letting your good deeds, yes, be seen by men. In 6:1, what He's saying, as He goes on to explain, is that when you do good deeds with the intention that other people will see them and glorify you, that they'll give glory to you and say, wow, look at what you're doing. That's what Jesus is warning against in chapter 6, where here He's saying, as you live out your life as the light of the world, it's going to be natural that people see that. And who are they going to give glory to? Not you, but they're going to give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So this is that job that we have as Christians. When people say, you're so kind, or thank you for what you did, or we love your church. Your church is so loving and giving. Thank you for what you did. We have to be those who point back to the source of the light and say, it's really just because God has done so much for us. I like to tell people that when they say, well, why are you doing this? I like to say, God has done so much for us that all we can do in response is to do stuff for others, to help others in some way. So we are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. We are to do our good deeds before others, that they may see our good deeds and glorify our Father who is in heaven. In that way, we both preserve, in other words, we bring life, and we push back darkness. We bring light to a world that needs it.